Kupina kuphi emakhaya emadolobheni aseComplasta khona lapho ubukela khona SABC 1 awusangena thina ke mavula ngidlela sangena ke thine ke bekunene belungelo lakho. A very warm welcome to you all. Leli ke lungelo lakho bekunene, it's your right. Uhlelo ke lelethela ke tindzaba texwayiso nako konke lokuthinza ke nine nje batheni. Mike ngisimphiwe Nconda singena endzabeni namhla. Under these harsh economic times, characterized by reduced incomes and bad credit records, owning a home is fast becoming a fading dream for many consumers. That is why some are finding innovative ways to bypass the normal process of purchasing properties. And one of those processes is the rent-to-own option. Kumanje ke lendlela ekuthenga ke umuti i-rent-to-own seyilithemba labanengi.
Ukuba nekhaya lakho elithi wena kuyinto enkulu nebalulekile, kodwa ukuthenga umuzi kudinga isamba semali. Nokuyinto efike yesinde kubathenga abaningi, ikakhulukazi uma irekhodi lakho ngakwezokuphathwa kwezimali noma i-credit score lingelihle kahle, kuba umqansa. Omunye wabantu abanesifiso esikhulu sokuthenga umuzi owesifazane osemncane, uKgotsofatso Hlapi waseGoli. Uthi uyasebenza kodwa akakwazi ukuthengela izingane zakhe umuzi ngoba irekhodi lakhe liyantengantenga.
And i-credit rating ne-credit score ukuthi kube njalo. Phuma esikoleni ngisasesikoleni ngi-applyela i-NSFAS senginesikweletu sokuqala. Ngicala sengiyasebenza manje sengivule retail store account ukuthi ngizokwazi ukukhuphula i-credit record. So I can't keep up nama payments wazo zonke lezinto because ekhaya they're depending on me ngisebenza ngiyedwa. At that time benginomntana oyedwa. Then ifamily nayo iyakhula abantwana sebawu2. And then after some time I lost my job. Now I go back to our creditors to say angisebenzi, can we please make an arrangement, like I don't have any form of income whatsoever. Then mazokutshela ukuthi the system doesn't allow. That's when our credit record was terrible, it was bad. I couldn't afford like because I kept trying to apply for finance. Now wonke ama banks and bonke bang decline.
Umbiko ovela enkampanini Debt Busters ukhombisa ukuthi abathengi bacwila ezikweletini. Lo mbiko uthi kubi ngalendlela yokuthi abathengi sebeze baboleka imali ukuze bathenga ukudla. Lokhu kucwila ezikweletini ke kwabathengi kungomunye womthelela uholela ekutheni amabhange anqabe nemali. Lo mama wamadodana amabili uthi kunzima ukukhulisela izingane emqashweni.
Ngihlala ecomplexini manje kunemithetho, abantwana abanandawo yokudlala, abantwana bakhona ukudlala after 5 o'clock, abantwana bakwazi ukudlala ngebhola, like akukho family friendly ukuhlala emzini womunye umuntu.
Uthi indawo encane ngesinda.
When level 5 lockdown was introduced, sekuthiwa asihlaleni namakhaya, bengizwa ngathi ikhanda lami lizoduma. Depression yakhuphuka because we are cooped up espacing esincane. Asikhona ukuphumela ngaphandle, even noma kuizwa ama restrictions for thina, ispace sasesincane. Ingadi asinayo. Indawo yokudlala ayikho. Kumele siphumele ngaphandle. La sihlala khona akukho. So ibanga a lot of mina ukusindwa kakhulu because ngihlezi ngila endlini, hlezi ngicabanga ene isifiso leso ukuthi hey ungathi ngelinye ilanga nami ngaba nemuzo okowami.
Uma kukanjena ke kwenziwa njani? Yiziphi ezinye izindlela lomthenga angasizakala ngazo ukuze athenge umuzi ngaphandle kokuyoboleka imali ebhange? Ingabe uhlelo i-rent to own luyimpendulo? Hlengiwe Shibambo. Yilungelo Lakho.
Well, to hear more about rent to buy, its benefits and the disadvantages to the consumers, let's now extend a warm welcome to attorney Meya Duval, who joins us now via Skype. Siphinze sibe na Anele Matakane lo wathi ke konke ngetindvo tema-budgets nema-home loan. Gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Our pleasure.
All right, Meya, I'm going to start with you. So much has been said about the rent to own option, but the information that has been coming forth with regards to the pros and cons has been rather flimsy. Just want to take us through what rent to own is and the pros and cons of this option.
Thank you. We started the rent to own concept in 2007, and that is when the National Credit Act came out. We saw a lot of people could not afford a home loan. And as we just had in this discussion before, the lady that had the predicament, we saw that credit scores are your biggest disadvantage when you've got a bad credit score, that it will disallow you to qualify for a home loan. Through the years now, we're looking back at 2007 to 2021 now, we see that credit scores are your biggest problem. Then the next problem is your affordability. And once your credit score is damaged, it takes a very long time to get your credit score repaired. And unfortunately, there are three requirements when the banks are looking for a home loan. Number one is your credit score. Number two, what is your affordability? And number three is, do you have a deposit or what's the value of a property, what you want to buy? So indeed, rent to buy is a solution for many people to assist them with a opportunity to buy their property, but you have to do that on a very structured manner. If you go in and just sign a lease agreement and you don't have the right legal documents prepared, that rent to buy can be very bad for the seller and also detrimental for the buyer. So you have to have a very strong structure there. You have to have a vision to work forwards that you want to improve your credit score. A lot of people come to us where their credit scores are so bad, and we have to then present that bad credit score to the landlord that will be selling the property. The problem is you've got to try to convince the seller that a person with a bad credit score or payment history will sign up to buy the property when they have clearly demonstrated that they cannot afford their past payments. And that is a red flag for any landlord or any bank that wants to grant a home loan. And that is one of the big problems in South Africa today.
Now, Meya, is buying a sound long-term investment? Because I've heard so many consumers lamenting the fact that, the amount paid over time in general far exceeds the actual value of the home. So the longer the loan period, the more you'll pay the bank.
Well, if you look at the normal home loan repayment is 20 years, but you can also extend it to 30 years. Now, we do a lot of property transactions and work out the installments for buyers and for buyers, and you will definitely see that over a 20-year period, you pay back double the amount of your rental of the home loan that you actually applied for. But the same applies now if you've rented a property for 20 years. Normally, you can rent the property for a little bit less than you would have paid on a home loan, but after 20 years, you have nothing. The only thing that the landlord has is a paid-off property. The tenant actually paid off his entire home loan, and you as the tenant sit with nothing, and you don't have a property that's paid up, and the landlord is bond-free. So yes, you do pay a lot of money. Very few people have actually the discipline to save the difference between the rental amount and the home loan amount and put that in some kind of investment. If one can do that and you have a discipline, maybe you'll have a similar return on your investment after 20 years. But in general, people can actually pay off a home loan and sit with a bond-free property after 15 or 20 or 30 years.
Okay. Now, Anele, let me also bring you into this conversation. What are your thoughts and inclinations with regards to the differences between the rent-to-own option and buying a home, the traditional route?
The rent-to-own is very structured, and it gives one an access into the market because you get people that are coming from debt review with a low credit profile. However, they're unable to access the market at that point in time. And the other option that's nice about it, it gives an option of choosing which property do you want to buy. So the way it's structured and the people that it caters for, it's ideal for anyone that wants access to the market. However, the traditional route of a home loan It is ideal, however, it does not accommodate everybody. Hence, the bank, the first issue they check is the affordability as well as the credit profile. So the minute the credit profile is not there, although one can be able to afford the repayment, because of the credit profile that they look at, it disqualifies a consumer.
Now, Anel, it's often said that, making regular rental payments helps you build, I would say, a great track record in payments and hence a healthy credit score. What does it mean, though? Is it true, given the fact that this is not a credit arrangement?
The thing is, it's not true. I will tell you why, Simpiwe. If you're paying your landlord every month, however, you are not paying your creditors. Remember, the landlord is not a creditor, it's a landlord. Let's say you're paying that rental cash on a monthly basis, and yet your creditors are neglecting. The creditors will update the credit profiles, whereas your landlord will say, thank you, Simpiwe. So now, end of the day, you've got 10 years renting your property, you've never missed a payment. However, your accounts, you skip paying them, which does affect the credit profile negatively. That on its own, regardless of affordability, will disqualify you to afford a property via home loan route.
So, ngubani-ke lo qualifier for this rent-to-own option? I mean, what is the criteria used?
We look at affordability, number one, and then we also look at past payment. We find a lot of people have got small debt that they forgot about. They've got maybe a judgment that they also paid up. The judgment is not yet settled. So we look at the entire restructuring of a person. Did they change their life and did they change their behavior? Obviously, you cannot put a person into a rent-to-buy structure when they are clearly too deep in debt and they can't meet their normal payments. We have a lot of people coming to us and ask us, please, I need a place right now. And you can identify from the desperation that their lease will expire somewhere, and they think that rent-to-buy is just a quick fix of not actually considering my other debt and my repayments. So we need to analyze and help each person when we sign up a rent-to-buy agreement and we do that analysis, that person doesn't end up in hotter water than he is at the moment. So people are very quick to say, just give me an opportunity to buy the house, and they really don't actually look at the responsibilities and the reality of being able to pay the rental, the rates and taxes, and all the obligations that goes with owning a property. So we'd still do a very careful analysis, and that's maybe Anela can add on that why we have also been expanded this to a budget fitness program. We feel that everybody that is going through the process of signing up a lease agreement or a rent-to-buy agreement needs to get their budget fit. And we need to keep your budget fit. Similar like you're going to the gym. Do your exercises on a regular basis. Make sure that you budget, that you know where you're going to. Yeah. So that's a very critical part of getting your budget fit and making sure that you are sustainable as a tenant and a buyer.
All right, Mayor, I'm going to engage you a little bit more about the legalities with regards to the rent-to-own option, seeing that it is a gentleman's agreement between the landlord and the tenant who will soon become buyer and seller. So what are the laws with regards to regulating this kind of transaction? I would like to engage you after this break, but please stay on the line, Mayor. We'll certainly touch base with you in just a moment. Asibambe lapho ke mbukeli sizoshelela ngasetitolo. Namhla ke bekene sikhuluma nge-rent-to-own. Nangabe ke ufuna kuthenga umuti kanti ke awukhona qualify lapha ebhange seyikhona ke option ukuthi ungawurenta lo muti loyo ukuthi ke emva kwesikhathi bese ke uyagcina uyawuthenga ukuthi ke what are the legalities, what are the pros and the cons, what are the advantages and the disadvantages of the rent to own option? Sinabuchwephesha ke batasingatha ke kulelo ndzaba leyo. Leli lungelo lakho bekunene asesingade tolo. Asiphinde sikwamukele ke mbukeli ke hleleni ilungelo lakho, it's your right. Tincingo tethu ke sethivuliwe ukuthi nawe ungaba ingcenye lenkulumo yethu. Sishayela licingo ku 0117146918 noma ke 0117146919. Ungasithumela futhi ne-email ku consumer@sabc.co.za. Ungasiphinda uthole futhi na ku Facebook. Namhla ke bekunene, if you just joined us, sikhuluma nge-rent to own option. Kuthi ingabe ingiyo yini indlela lephilako ekuthi ke nangabe awukhoni uthenga umuti ngoba i-credit score yakho iyakushaya. Kuthi can you explore this option? What are the pros and the cons? What are the advantages and the disadvantages of renting to buy option. Sinaye-ke ummeli lo ngichwephesha ke ngetekuthenga ke imiti ema-properties kanye ke netindlu sina Mayor Duval siphinde sibe na Anele Matakana yena ke he is responsible for budgeting when it comes to property. Now Anele, before we went to that break, Mayor usichazele kabande ukuthi nine ke nibochwephesha nakulothiwa ke budget fitness program kuthi ngabe sihlwanisini leso nokuthi ke ingabe ngangisida yini ku-improve i-credit score yami.
Into enzekayo Simphiwe, abantu abaninzi into ebachanayo yindlela elungisela izimali zabo uqinisekisa ukuthi imali umuntu ayipeyayo iyakwazi ukumelana nendlela aphila ngayo. Loo nto ke ngoku inceda uba umuntu akwazi ukubona uba yintoni akwazi ukuyithenga yintoni angakwazi ukufikelela kuyo. Uthenga indlu into ebalulekileyo kumntu wonke osemzantsi ngoba wonke umuntu kufuneka abe nendawo yokuhlala. Inika isidima ke nengqinisekiso yokuba umuntu uyakwazi ukuprovida okanye ukhusela ifemeli yakhe ngokukwazi ukunika inantsika indawo yokuhlala. Kodwa ke ngoku i-challenge ekhoyo kubantu abaninzi yindlela yokucwangcisa imali. Uqinisekisa qualifier into esifumanayo abantu abaninzi baphuma esikolweni afuna esikoleni senezikoliti. Loo nto ke ngoku imenze ke ungakwazi uqualify for indlu angakwazi ukuthenga izinto ezibheka phambili ezinokwazi ukunika isidima. Into esiyenzayo thina kwikhampani kuqinisekisa uba umuntu siyameluleka ngengqondo sikwazi ukumcebisa ukuba akwazi ulungisa i-finances zakhe bhetere. Umzekelo ndiqhela ukwenza ke omninzi nditsho emntwini akakwazi ushiya imoto yakhe ku-N1 xa ithe ityala lakhe laflet akazonashiya imoto yakhe. Uqinisekisa ufundisa ulimathi kulisibane.
Hayi ngathi Anele ke sibane bulukhuni ke ukukuva ngoba your line is bad there silishaqisa ligogo kepha ke sitawuzama ukuthi silungise lelo in just a moment, but in the meantime as we are fixing Anele's line, let's take our first caller. Sinaphumzile ke lapha ke eThekwini. Sakumole hlele nisabona.
Hello.
Yebona njani mak?
Sathila.
Khuluma nathi mama, what's on your mind?
Oh, nginombuzo la kule ndaba ka rent to own.
Yes.
Rent to own ngi judgment. Ikwelete engazenzanga ngingasebenzi. Manje sengiyasebenza. Rent to own uthi uthatha umuntu from 3.5 to 10,000. I can say that angisho kanjalo. Manje inkinga yami isekutheni ngihola 17,000 angiqualify ku rent to own ngine judgment ibhenki alikwazi ukunginikeza imali ukuze ngithenge umuzi. Ngiyarenta for 11 years manje ngirenta 5.5 la ngirenta khona and nginabatwana sebekhulile manje lapho sihleli la kulendlu le ngirentayo anginawo umuzi angikwazi uqualify ukuthi ngithenge umuzi because imali yami engiholayo is 17,000 and abafuna bona bayaqala ukuthi umuntu akabo 3,000 to 10,000 angisaqualify lapho manje kulokho ngeze njani.
Okay, Phumzile ngumbuto omhle kakhulu loyo. Sicela ukuthi uchubeke ubukele ilungelo lakho ngoba ke ukhona ke ummele lo ngichwephesha ke ekuthengeni imiti nema properties, Mayor Duval. Mr. Duval, just in a nutshell, we have Phumzile here on the call on the line from Durban. She's saying that she's been renting this particular property for the past 11 years, but then she does have a judgment in her name. She's renting for about 5,000 rand and she earns a salary of 17,000 rand. So with this particular judgment hovering above her head, can she qualify?
There are two rent-to-buy structures. The one is rent-to-buy with finance, and there you have to apply the very strict rules of lending out money. And then there's a rent-to-buy between the seller and the buyer that doesn't involve any finance. Definitely in the second part with rent-to-buy, what we call rent-to-buy standard, is there will be negotiation between the seller and the buyer. And then the judgment really doesn't make any impact between the negotiation between the seller and the buyer. There's also a third opportunity called an installment sale. An installment sale is regulated by the Alienation of Land Act that dates back from 1981. And again, there are quite a couple of things that one needs to discuss about, but it's not as simple as just like a normal rent to buy, but it's regulated by the Act. So there are definitely solutions. If a seller and the buyer, well, let's say if there's a seller available and the property identified, then indeed one can actually enter into a rent-to-buy agreement between the seller and the buyer. If it's a finance involved, which is a separate structure that we've put together, then one needs to look at the judgment, how long the judgment was taken out, what is the status of that judgment, and everything from that side. So There's definitely merits in every application, and one needs to analyze each one of them, because as this lady said now, she's been paying rent for so many years. That money could have gone down to actually help her own her own property, and she could have started paying off her own rent to buy or a home loan. Then there's even also the consideration of a government subsidy called FLISP. If a person earns less than 22,000 Rand, then you can also get a subsidy from the government. But for that, you need a home loan, and for a home loan, you need the judgment removed. So there are so many solutions for property buyers. They just need to know about this and know where to knock on, which door they knock on to get assistance.
Yeah, I'm interested to know a little bit more about the second option between both parties and between buyer and seller. But please hold your thoughts there, Mayor. We'll certainly touch base with you in just a moment. Let's take another pause and see it magete stop in this buye kona nyalo. Leli lungelo lakho. Welcome back. Sibonamukele babukeli etinhlehleni lakho ilungelo lakho, it's your right. Khumbula ukuthi tingcodo tivuliwe ukuthi nawe ke ungavakalisa umbono wakho. Our participation lines are open and the numbers are on your screens right now. 011-714-6918 noma ke 011-714-6919. You can also email your thoughts to consumer@sabc.co.za or like our Facebook page. You can find all the details on our Facebook page. Namhla ke bekunene sikhuluma nge-rent to own option. Nangabe ucela usijoyina kuthi ke nangabe silwane sile rent to own option sebachazile ke tinintetfu nabachwepheshe ukuthi ke nangabe awuqualify ukuthi uthole i-loan yokuthenga indlu noma ukuthenga umuntu noma ke any other property ungasebenzisa ke le rent to own option. Mayor ke ungummeli ke with properties uchazile ukuthi there's two options, which is the rent to own with finance noma ke rent to own between two parties, wena ke nemcashi wakho noma ke wena ke namastandi wakho, who can then become your seller. Now, Mayor, and just picking up on the point that you made before we went to that ad break about the second option involving the buyer and the seller, you're saying that there is no finance involved. Does it mean that no financial institution can be involved in this particular arrangement, seeing that there is a possibility that the buyer might need assistance in terms of raising the deposit?
Well, this is actually the rent to buy that we started with in 2007. There was no finance, no bank involved, or no financial institution involved. So what we would do is there would be a seller, there would be a buyer, and we would come to an agreement between the two of them and draw the required legal documents. What we would require normally would be a 2 months deposit, so you don't have to go to any bank to borrow that money. We would like you to have your own deposit available, because if you go out and borrow that money again, it shows that you are financially kind of not so strong. So we would require you to have at least your own deposit for at least 2 months. So there would be a structure between the seller and the buyer. There would be a lease agreement, and there would be a sale agreement, and there would be an option agreement. So we structured the documents that it's simple to use. It's the standard lease agreement, the standard deed of sale, plus an option that you add on. So the whole idea comes to standardize the documents and the agreement very simplistic between the seller and the buyer, and that everybody understands the agreements, what they're in for, and then combine that with a personal trainer of a budget fitness. So anybody that actually can find a property or a seller, we can help them to structure that agreement that they can pay it back and they don't have to go to a bank to go actually apply for any property finance. We did have a structure in place where a fund would give us money that we can help those people to buy the properties, where the fund would buy the properties, but that's on ice for the moment, and we'll roll that out later in the year. At the moment, we have actually quite a nice lifestyle upmarket apartments available, where the seller has agreed that the buyers can pay back those properties over a 15-year period. So these are really amazing opportunities. I don't want to, it's not a sales discussion at all, but what I'm saying is that a lot of sellers are coming to us and say, Mayor, I want to sell my property, and can you please find us a buyer that we can help the buyer to pay this property over 3 or 5, in this case, 15 years back. So there are so many opportunities where sellers say, I want to help buyers to become homeowners. I'm actually available to give my property or properties available under this structure that they can come and invest in property. And we want them to empower themselves to become homeowners, because we realize the longer that people are paying rent, the more they trap themselves into a rental trap and never get out of it. So definitely the opportunity by sellers coming forward and say, help us to sell the property, find us a buyer, and help us to put the structure together.
Since this, Mayor, is a gentleman's agreement between landlord and tenant who will at a later stage become buyer and seller, what are the legalities? Because I would imagine there are risks involved, because here you are entering into an agreement with someone that you hardly know. So what are the laws regulating this way of purchasing property?
Yes. Yes, it's indeed a gentleman's agreement. It starts off with a gentleman's agreement, but then it escalates into legal documents. So you can shake a person's hand and say, I'm renting your property, but it's much better to have that in a written lease agreement. So we structure the documents correctly. There's no law that regulates how a rent-to-buy structure must be prepared, but through years we've learned how to put it together. So basically what we have is a normal lease agreement. I hereby agree to rent your property at a certain price per month. Then I have a right to buy your property any time between now and the next 5 years. If I do buy the property at that time, so there will be a deed of sale as well, and then we agree on a purchase price. And then we also need to have an option document on top of that to say that I have a right to exercise my option to buy your property within now 5 or 10 years or 15 years, as the example I've just explained. And when you exercise the option, you come around with a one-page document and say, here I am, I'm now ready to buy your property. I have paid up the full purchase price, or in the meantime, I have actually managed to get a home loan from a bank, and now I exercise the option because I'm ready to buy. So this is very important to put all these right legal documents together. But we found that so many institutions or many places, or even the government, we found, were trying to put rent-to-buy structures together, and they were not doing it, in our view, the right way. And the right way would be to assist your future buyer, your tenant, in improving his or her credit score. Looking at the judgments, cleaning out the judgments, renegotiating with debtors to do restructuring, because you do not want to have a burden and the weight of debt hanging over your head for the rest of your life. So clearing up the credit score, panel beating, improving it is definitely very much part of that. When we get the installment sale, which a lot of transactions we do, installment sale is close to a rent-to-buy agreement, but it's a strongly regulated agreement, and here the Alienation of Land Act regulates what needs to be done. It's quite an intricate act, but it's a very strong act, and it gives very good protection to the seller and the buyer. Often I do an installment sale rather than a rent-to-buy agreement, particularly when the buyer has a large deposit to be put down. Now we also see the National Credit Act coming into play, and we have to accommodate the National Credit Act and the rules and requirements of the National Credit Act, because this actually becomes a financial agreement between the seller and the buyer. So there are a couple of matters we can discuss on that. I don't know if we need to go too technical on that today, but there are so many opportunities to help the seller and the buyer structure the right legal document. So that handshake or that gentleman's agreement actually becomes a very strong document that the seller and the buyer has rights to. So definitely you need to analyze a person, scrutinize his past payment. You cannot and you do not want to put any person into your house with a rent-to-buy agreement or an installment sale agreement where you do not know that this person does have a commitment and also have financial means to actually do the payments.
All right. You know, Mayor, I want us to look a little bit more beyond that particular handshake between buyer and seller in a moment, so please hold that thought. As and we're having a very, very interesting discussion today. Manje sesiphinde sibuyele ke Titolo, and yeah, welcome back. Namhla sikhuluma nge rent to own option. Kuthi ke yini le rent to own option? Who qualifies for it, and some of the costs involved? Kuthi ke who bears the cost ye rent to own? Na kuthi ke imithetho ke lengamela ke this particular option. Kuthi what are the legalities? Kuthi ke yini kumele ukuthi kwende na yonke ke paperwork na yonke imininingwane letsinza ke I rent to own. Before we get to our guest, let's take a next caller. We've got Aphelele in Cape Town. Sakumele hleleni sawubona. Aphelele, welcome to the show. All right, we have lost Aphelele. We'll try to re-establish connection with Aphelele in Cape Town. She probably has some more valuable information that she would love to share with us. Anele, welcome to the show.
Yeah, can you hear me?
All right, yes, Anele, let me welcome you back to the show. Namhlanje sikhuluma ke ngendaba ye rent to own. I want us to get to the granular details of rent to own. Who bears the cost of the entire process? I would imagine the transfer costs. Transfer costs.
I can maybe add there, because from a legal perspective, we draw the documents. So normally you would find a seller and a buyer would approach us and say they want to conclude an agreement, and we normally charge them a legal fee to prepare the deed of sale, unless they have already got the deed of sale. But then we have to add the option agreement, we've got the lease agreement, so it can be a cost that's shared between the seller and the buyer, or the buyer can say they will absorb it themselves. If you then normally the transfer process is delayed, and because of a delay in transfer process, the purchaser in 99% of all the purchase transactions always carries the cost of transfer. So, but remember, because the transfer process is delayed until you exercise the option, only then the buyer would pay the transfer cost. So apart from the legal fee that we do charge to prepare the documents, the standard transfer cost and fees will be applicable. If you do have an installment sale in terms of the Alienation of Land Act, then there needs to be other documents drafted, because your contract needs to be registered against the title deed, and that contract gives the purchaser a lot more protection. So normally we agree between the seller and the buyer that they either will split it 50-50, or the buyer will pay for the legal cost to have these contracts prepared.
You made it sound so seamless to undertake this particular process, Mayor, by involving a lawyer. So what's the importance of involving an attorney in this particular arrangement? And can both parties bypass this process and not involve the lawyer?
We have seen in the past that people would do a handshake and say, I hereby give you the right to buy the property. Then 3 or 4 years or 5 years later, you find that you have paid the money now in rent, and maybe you have paid a little bit more extra money, and then all of a sudden the seller says, I do not want to sell the property to you anymore. So you need to have a very strong legal document that you as buyer can exercise your rights. The same applies for the seller. Quite often they forget that the property price will escalate in 3 or 5 or 10 years from now, and then you also have to accommodate that there's some escalation in the price if you do advise the parties before that. So we found that people sometimes come to us with a handshake and they think that they've got the document. Sometimes they think they only have a lease agreement, and in the lease agreement is a clause written in to say the buyer has the right to buy the property. But if you go back to the law, you have to have the right structure in place to say the day that I exercise this option to buy, it must form a valid deed of sale. So if you only have a lease agreement, you only have a handshake, you only have a one-page document, you're most likely not going to comply with the rules of South Africa that requires the written agreement between the seller and the buyer, because that, number one, is the big document that you need to have. Is any agreement related to the sale of a property must be in writing, it must be signed by the seller and the buyer, and it must identify the parties and the price and the property. So yes, indeed, you need to have the right documents in place to protect the seller and both the buyer.
Because at the end of the day, it definitely has to be a win-win situation. Please hold your thoughts there, Mayor. And Anele will also come back to you in just a moment. But for now, let's take our next caller, Sina Vatiswa from Cape Town. Vatiswa. Hi, Vatiswa, welcome to the show. All right, we lost Vatiswa again. Well, technology is failing us today, so we'll try to re-establish connection in just a moment. Now, Mayor, just continuing with our discussion, because tenants have the view of owning that particular property one day, they are more inclined to keep it in a good condition, which obviously benefits the seller. As I mentioned, every transaction in whatever shape or form needs to be a win-win situation involving both parties. So in this particular instance, it does appear that only the seller benefits.
No, you see, the seller does benefit because we always say that once you rent a property with an option to buy, you become house proud. We find that people actually go out and start improving the garden. We find that they water the garden much better. They look after the house in a much better situation than just a tenant, because a tenant's got the concept that if something breaks, I either leave it or I phone the landlord to come and sort it out for me. What we do with a rent-to-buy agreement is to say that from the moment you start occupying the property, you take responsibility of the property. The landlord still insures the property if it burns down because it's still registered on the name of the landlord. But you as buyer has to start catering and looking after the garden, the property improvements, and paint and all that, because you are now caring for your own property. And we say that people become house proud. And because of this, there's a win-win for the seller and the buyer. The benefit for the buyer is, as Annette said earlier, you get your foot into the door right now. If you wait for another 5 or 6 years, you find that the property price has increased so much that you're always busy with a catch-up all the time, and you never get your foot to actually put your foot into the door by owning a property. So it's important that you make a decision at an early stage, but also make a calculated decision. Can you actually afford the property? Can you also afford to do the maintenance on the property, keep the property in a nice condition, and also pay the rates and the taxes that goes along with the responsibilities of an owner?
All right, Annele, let me also bring you into this discussion. Let's get to the bolts and the nuts of buying or rather renting to own. And what is some of the documentation that needs to be taken care of? Sivile ke Mayor uthi kumcoka kakhulu ukuthi ummeli abe khona ke kule transaction le ukuthi yini ke lekumele kusikwende now onke ke lama costs la involved ekutheni ke le process lena ke iphumelele.
Simpiwe i-step sokuqala i-research ibaluleke kakhulu. Uqinisekisa ukuba uyayazi ukuba ungathenga ngamalini. Into zokuqala ke ngoku kufuneka ujonge i-expenses zakho, which is i-budget. I-budget yokuba kule mali ndiyipeyayo ngoku ndiphila njani, i-income yami ithini, i-expenses zami zithini. Into eza kuncedisa ke ngoku to draw up i-budget yakho, this document, which is i-3 months pay slip yakho ne-3 months bank statement yakho, to see exactly i-debit orders zakho ne-bank statement is required. Because the budget yakho, you must do it up to the T, ensuring that bank fees now as budgetella. It's an every expenditure that you normally do. See about one on paper. Once you finish that part, then you can be able to go and do a budget, and then go to your bank or make use of any other institution that can assist you to do a pre-qualification. I-pre-qualification kulapho bajongayo ukuthi unamandla okuthenga kanani na, because you don't want to go to a market ukhangela indlu ye-6 million only to find out to afford indlu ye-1 million. So i-pre-qualification si-steps esibini to check i-pre-qualification yam ithi ndingathenga kanani na. If while doing i-pre-qualification and then expect okanye i-institution icelileyo iyakubona uba i-credit profile yakho, into yokuqala bazayitsheka ukuba i-credit profile yakho isithini iscore sakho, is there any accounts ezikwi-arrears. If ke ngoku kukhe arrears, thina what we do have a team of experts esincedisayo ukuba umuntu if kukho inantsika i-arrears siyaqinisekisa ukuba siyayilungisa itayari lakho elele flat. Njengoba nditshitsho ekuqaleni ukuba akho moto ihlala ku-N1 okanye N2 ngenxa ye-flat tire.
Yes.
Take inantsika ulisipane and to fix itaya lakho and to move on. So when we've got a flat tire, what we do, we don't discard you. We assist you. We've got a team of guys that assist you to ensure that say panel beta, budget yakho accordingly. At the same time, speak to you, because sometimes you find out people they've got unrealistic needs, demands, meaning that you want to buy a house of 6 million, whereas your income is telling you that your house you can get only 100,000. So we try to accommodate and discuss and empower umuntu abone options ozothenga.
Okay.
And then pre-qualification yethu nethi sigqibe kulo part siyakwazi ke ngoku ukupartnerisha nendlu ezakwazi ukulungela. And sijonge ke ngoku i-buying options as well, because there are other mechanisms enothenga ngazo. Rent to buy, installment sale is the other one. Ikhona nenantsika ne-government subsidies that abanye abantu they can qualify for. Now it's a financing option ensuring at least what you can qualify, they can assist you in terms of a deposit. Zindlela esicebisa ngayo umuntu uqinisekisa uba before they go to the market bakhangele indlu bayayazi indlu imalini. Eyesibini ke ngoku Simphiwe, xa soyazi uthenga malini, you need to know what are the expected attorney costs, as Ume highlighted, there are attorney costs. And 99.9% those attorney costs are being paid by buyer.
Okay. So all right. Asishiye lapho ke Anele, please hold your thought. We'll certainly touch base with you after this break. Let's take our final ad break. Hlala nathi ungasanyakati. Leli lungelo lakho. Welcome to our very last segment on the show. Yilungelo Lakho, it's your right. Njoba namhla ke sikhuluma ke rent to own or rent to buy option. Is it a viable option? Nangabe ke awukhona qualifier for e-loan. Let's take our very last caller for the day. Sina Vatiso ulapha ke Cape Town. Sekumole ehlelweni sawubona.
Siyabona futhi uphilile.
Khuluma nathi mama. What's on your mind?
Khuluma noVatiswa Eastern Cape. Sicela ukubuza ukuthi ke ngoku xa ulapha Eastern Cape East London ungadibana nabani mhlawumbe xa uinterested ufuna ukuva ngeproperties ezi-under lo rent to buy wenza kanjani?
Okay, good question, Vatiswa. Please, uchubeke ubukele lihlelo tinintetho ke takusita kulolu hlangothi. And I'm sure you heard that Mayor and Anele, Vatiswa is in the Eastern Cape province, so she wants to know where should she go when she needs more information about the houses or the property available under the rent to own agreement.
As I said earlier, quite often the seller and the buyer find each other, and then they come to us and we assist them with a rent-to-buy structure. At the moment, because the rent-to-buy is such a fantastic opportunity, if we do find a property, we try to share that with people that are looking for properties, and normally this opportunity is taken up in the same day. So we don't actually have a database or a stock base of rent-to-buy properties, but it's up to any buyer to go to the seller and say, I would like to buy your property. I would like to do an installment sale, or I would like to do a rent-to-buy structure. Can we please start a discussion and explore how we can do that?
Okay.
So that's the best answer I can give, because they are not like a database like Property 24 or Private Property or something like that, where rent-to-buy units are made available.
Okay, since the buyer and the seller establish a purchase price for the home in their contract, at some point in the future, the buyer may want to purchase the home for that particular price that has been agreed on in that contract, regardless of what the home is actually worth at that particular point. Because if the contract is signed 10 years prior, and then the buyer may want to buy that property at the agreed price, so is that fair to the seller?
We do have an escalation clause, as I mentioned to you earlier about the 15-year repayment. We did realize and said to the seller that, remember, 15 years from now, you don't want to receive the 2021 price. So let's work in an escalation into the price. We print it out on a spreadsheet that the seller and buyer can agree on this price. And again, there's a carrot hanging in front of a buyer. The sooner the better they can actually qualify for a home loan, or maybe they can even qualify for a government subsidy called FLIS plus the home loan. The sooner the better they can actually take up, and one can almost say save money buying earlier. So we do put everything in one structure, but everybody knows exactly what they sign up for and what they'll pay in 10 or 15 years.
Okay, so Anele, iyaphi ke le mali le ngibhadalago every month? Ngibhadala libhange noma ngibhadala ke the owner of the home?
The money goes towards the owner of the home. But Simphiwe uphendula nje le caller isandophuma enye inanzika option yakhe. Remember abantu abarente iminyaka emihlanu and basaqhubekeka ngorenta. So ngoku it's about time umuntu ahlale nendlonto abuze kuba kudala ndirenta. Ngoku why don't we structure rent to buy if you are willing to sell, so that nayo inanzika tenant ikwazi ubona kuba there's a possibility of I will own this property, because you can't be renting for more than 10 years without any carrot or any sign of you owning the property.
Okay.
So we should start the conversation.
What are the main points that buyers or potential buyers need to ponder or take into consideration before baqale ke kungena ke le arrangement rent to own?
It's looking at location of property. Is this the property located where I want to be and do I want to be here for the next 5 to 10 years? Because at the end of the day, you don't want to rent a property. and you engage in a landlord, engage we have home and we contract you can't move out. Same thing that we need to look at outing it. We need to ensure your location is right and the lifestyle when it changes.
Yes.
It can be lucrative. And thirdly, make sure that you are able to get in a contract, a binding, and we've got expertise as
all right, and we are out of time, unfortunately. Anele Matakane and Mayor Duval, great chatting to you, gentlemen. Thank you so much for such a very eye-opening and a fruitful discussion. We do appreciate your time. Many thanks to our guests for their time. Please join us again next time for yet another fruitful consumer affairs discussion. Remember, our studio lines are only operational until 12 midday on Monday. So please don't call these lines when we are not live. From me, Simpio and the rest of the team, do have a pleasant week. Cheers. Yilungelo.